The golden sun of Mexico City illuminated the television set, reflecting off the studio's pristine surfaces. It was a morning like any other on Galilea Montijo's talk show, a space designed for light entertainment, fashion, and celebrity gossip. With her signature charisma, Galilea smiled at the cameras, exchanging jokes with her co-hosts. Yet, that morning, something was about to change the course of her life. During a casual conversation about fashion trends and an interview with a soap opera star, a seemingly innocent segment aired, a report on the rise of informal commerce in the country. Footage showed street vendors carrying merchandise under the scorching sun. Galilea chuckled ironically. "I just don't get it. Why don't they get a real job? Maybe they just enjoy being lazy." She scoffed without considering the weight of her words. Her laughter echoed across the set, and a few colleagues chuckled nervously. One producer in the control room frowned, sensing the discomfort among the technical staff. It wasn't the first time Galilea had made controversial remarks, but this time, the public's reaction was immediate. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of her comments spread like wildfire, accompanied by outrage and calls for a boycott. Public figures, journalists, and everyday citizens condemned her words as disrespectful towards the working class. "Does she really think poverty is a choice?" one user tweeted, garnering thousands of retweets. Meanwhile, at the National Palace, newly elected President Claudia Sabum was reviewing cabinet reports when an advisor showed her the video. Sabum frowned as she listened, her hands clasped on the table while observing the social media backlash. She knew she couldn't ignore it. In a country where inequality defined the fate of millions, Galilea's words highlighted an unacceptable disconnect between the media elite and reality. The backlash. Oblivious to the storm she had unleashed, Galilea left the set, convinced the show had been another success. She walked to her dressing room with the lightness of someone secure in her position. But when she picked up her phone, she was met with a flood of messages, mentions, and missed calls. Her face tightened as she saw the trending topics on Twitter. Her name was at the center of a firestorm. Scandals were nothing new in television, but this time felt different. The anger was palpable, the indignation transcending mere gossip. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through the posts. Each message of rejection sent a chill down her spine. That's when she realized something had shifted forever. Her assistant Valeria burst in without knocking, face tense. "Gali, you need to act. People are furious. They're organizing boycotts and calling for you to be removed from the show." Galilea raised an eyebrow and forced a laugh. "Please, this is Twitter. They'll move on in 2 days." But the certainty in her voice sounded fragile. Meanwhile, at the National Palace, President Sabum finished a meeting with her communications team when her social media advisor, Gabriela, handed her a tablet. "Madam President, I think you should see this." Claudia swiped through the screen, watching the video of Galilea over and over. The words gnawed at her. Mexico was undergoing a transformation, and comments like these only widened the gap between those living in privilege and those struggling daily. "Has she responded?" Claudia asked, crossing her arms. Gabriela shook her head. "Nothing, but the pressure's mounting. Journalists and even celebrities are demanding an apology." The president nodded slowly. "This isn't just about an apology. This is an opportunity to challenge this mindset and remind everyone that poverty isn't about personal effort, but historical and systemic structures. I want to address this in my next public event." The turning point. That night, Galilea sat in her dimly lit living room, the television muted. Her husband tried to comfort her, but her mind was elsewhere. Was it really that bad? She wondered. Wasn't that what many people privately believed? She pursed her lips and opened Twitter, the cursor blinking in the text box. "I'm sorry if my words offended anyone." But before she could finish, her phone buzzed with a chilling notification. Breaking news from a major outlet. President Claudia Sabum to address Galilea Montijo's comments in national speech. Blood drained from her face. What did that mean? Would it be a passing remark, or was she about to become the symbol of something far bigger? What would you do? Double down, or face the truth? The next morning, the television studio was unusually quiet as Galilea arrived. Her team watched her tensely, as though expecting an explosion. No cheerful greetings or morning banter. Everyone knew what was coming. In just a few hours, President Sabum would speak publicly, and no one could predict the fallout. Galilea tried to act normal, but anxiety gnawed at her chest. She retreated to her dressing room, inhaled deeply, and unlocked her phone. The backlash hadn't faded. The criticism had multiplied, now joined by mainstream media outlets questioning whether her career could recover. Analysts debated if she'd join the ranks of disgraced celebrities who fell from grace after tone-deaf remarks. Valeria entered cautiously, holding a piece of paper. This is what the PR team suggests: a short apology without admitting too much fault. Galilea read the statement in silence. It said all the right things but felt hollow. "People don't care about empty apologies," she murmured, dropping the paper on the table. "They want blood or truth, and I'm not sure I have either to give." The reckoning. At the National Palace, Claudia Sabum's communications team finalized preparations for her speech. The event, originally scheduled to discuss social development, had taken a new direction. Sabum saw the moment as a chance to spark a deeper conversation about inequality in Mexico. Cameras were set, and the audience gathered in the plaza outside the palace. The president approached the podium with her characteristic calm and determination. "This week," she began, "we've seen how a single comment on television can ignite a national debate. But it's not just about one comment, it's about a mindset. One that has hurt this country for too long." Her words echoed across the square. In her dressing room, Galilea watched the live broadcast, a chill running down her spine. "Poverty is not a choice," Sabum continued. "It's not the result of laziness, but centuries of inequality. Invisible barriers that prevent millions from accessing the same opportunities. As long as we believe suffering is due to lack of effort, we deny the reality of our own country." Galilea swallowed hard. There were no personal attacks, no insults, just facts that hit harder than any direct accusation. The president paused, locking eyes with the camera. "The real challenge isn't for those criticized this week. It's for all of us. Will we keep ignoring the reality of millions, or will we start changing the conversation?" The auditorium fell silent. Galilea's breath quickened. For the first time in years, she had no quick comeback, no rehearsed response, just the weight of a truth she could no longer ignore. A new perspective. That night, unable to sleep, Galilea found herself driving aimlessly through the city. Without realizing it, she ended up in a neighborhood she hadn't visited in years. The streets were narrow, houses worn down, children playing under flickering streetlights. She parked by a taco stand run by an elderly man who prepared food with ritualistic precision. The scent of grilled meat and warm tortillas filled the air, stirring long-buried memories. "Good evening," the man greeted with a kind smile. "What can I get you?" Galilea hesitated. "Two suadero, one pasta." As he cooked, he glanced at her. "I've seen you on TV. My wife used to watch your show." Her stomach nodded. "And what do you think about all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The taquero shrugged. "I don't know much about those things. I just know I wake up at 5 a.m. every day to come here, and my wife does the same for her cleaning job. We're not lazy. We just want respect." The clink of the spatula against the griddle filled the heavy silence. Galilea inhaled deeply, meeting the man's tired yet resolute gaze. There was no anger, only exhaustion, the kind born not from lack of sleep but from life itself. Taking the tacos, she sat at a nearby plastic table, eating quietly. Each bite felt different, not because of taste, but because, for the first time, she truly saw the reality she'd ignored. Her phone buzzed, a message from Valeria. "President Sabum has agreed to appear on our show to discuss inequality." Galilea froze, the taco slipping from her hand. No turning back now.
The conversation. The next morning, the studio buzzed with tension, cameras in place, lights adjusted, producers barking orders, but for Galilea, time crawled. She'd spent her career navigating interviews with charm and quick wit. But today, there would be no hiding behind jokes.
Valeria peeked in. "Everything's ready. Sabum just arrived." Galilea stood, stomach knotted, and walked onto the set. Across the stage stood the president, calmly conversing with her team. She wore a simple suit, her hair pulled back. No need to flaunt power when her presence radiated it. Their eyes met. For the first time in her career, Galilea felt genuine fear. The director counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Good morning, Mexico," Galilea began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Today, we have a special program, an important conversation. It's an honor to welcome Mexico's President, Dr. Claudia Sabum." The camera zoomed in on Sabum, who nodded politely. Galilea exhaled. Now or never. "Madam President," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I think the question everyone wants me to ask is, how wrong was I?" The studio held its breath. Sabum tilted her head, considering. "It's not about how wrong you were," she replied calmly. "It's about how willing you are to hear what's never been said to you." Galilea shivered. Sabum continued. "For years, this country has been fed narratives that blame the poor for their poverty. We're told hard work alone guarantees success, but not everyone starts from the same place. When someone with privilege says poverty stems from laziness, they don't just spread falsehoods, they erase the struggles of millions." Galilea wanted to argue, to defend herself. But deep down, she knew the president was right. "So, Galilea," Sabum concluded, "now that you know, what will you do with this truth?" Silence swallowed the room. Galilea's throat tightened. She could spin a PR-friendly answer, but it wouldn't matter. Not this time. "I don't know," she admitted, voice cracking. "I grew up believing hard work was everything, that you earned your place through effort. But I see now, not everyone has the same starting line. I don't know how to change my mindset overnight, but I want to learn." Murmurs rippled through the studio. Sabum studied her for a moment, then nodded. The first step is listening. Something inside Galilea fractured, then simultaneously began to heal. That day, the show became less about scandal and more about reality. Weeks later, her program transformed. Instead of frivolous gossip, she invited workers, single mothers, and resilient youth to share their journeys. Some viewers complained, but others praised the shift. One morning, Sabum, watching TV over breakfast, smiled faintly as Galilea interviewed a farm laborer about life in the fields. Galilea hadn't mastered the lesson, she'd only begun to learn. But for the first time, she was asking the right questions, and that made all the difference.